Aliza. This workshop, I don't remember the exact title because it's not in front of me, but it's something about beyond skills, going beyond the content of DBT and being able to really engage clients in DBT treatment to offer them the maximum that DBT has to offer. What we'll be doing today is going to be partly didactic, partly experiential. And that's because while I have some thoughts to share, I don't know that anything in this workshop in and of itself is going to be particularly groundbreaking. But I think what is really important here is to be able to kind of reflect on our DBT practice and practice just taking it up a notch, because no matter how well we're doing, there's typically always room for improvement. So just to get a sense of who's here right now, I'm curious by raise of hand, how many people here consider themselves new to DBT? Anyone? All right, and who here considers themselves kind of like comfortable plus? Okay, and then I'm also curious people's interest in, if you're here, you're interested in engaging clients in group therapy in DBT, by raise of hand, versus individual therapy. Okay, there's a lot of like faltering on that one. And if people are here because they need a break from talking about trauma and this was the other option available, that's good too, and happy to have you. So a little bit just about me. Like I said, my name is Aliza. I'm currently in private practice in Efrat and an undergraduate professor at Touro College here in Israel. Interestingly, my practice right now, DBT is really not the focus, though I do always come back to the skills and always find myself integrating it and incorporating it into the work that I do. But I was really privileged that my first exposure to DBT years ago when I was a summer intern at Achieve Behavioral Health in Muncie in the States, I had a really, really positive first exposure. There was a training that they offered through a company called Behavioral Tech, and the trainer, Dr. Adam Payne, was wonderful. I'm actually going to be using some of the material from that training all those years ago today, which I think just goes to show the impact that an engaging presenter can have. And as I went on in my DBT experiences across inpatient and outpatient settings, I found myself not infrequently kind of dismayed by seeing this treatment that I was introduced to as being so full of life and full of humor and so useful, being presented in this really dry, boring, like stuffy college professor way. And I had enough experiences seeing DBT being presented in a way that didn't really allow clients to engage, and got frustrated enough that it sort of, when Sachi reached out to me, it's like, this is what I want to talk about. How do we take all the raw material that's so useful and so helpful and so backed up by research and really bring it to clients in a way that works for them, but also that works for us as clinicians. All right, we're still not. Okay, I'm just going to follow along here to keep myself oriented. All right, so just to give a quick example of the kind of thing that I'm talking about, I want to share with you how Adam Payne back in the day spoke about mindfulness versus how I've heard some other people talk about mindfulness, okay? So often, because mindfulness is thrown around so much and we're so used to it and we do it all the time at presentations and consultation teams and wherever else, right? I think sometimes we can fall into the trap of forgetting that clients may not be on board, right? They may associate mindfulness with, it's nice and you can like practice meditation and it's like this thing that hippies do and it's great, but not really for me, right? So how do we get clients on board with something like mindfulness? So I still remember the way Adam Payne presented it, and can you hear me if I'm off the mic? Okay, I need two hands, but we'll try to make this work. So the way that Adam Payne spoke about mindfulness, for those of you who are familiar with the Goals of Mindfulness training handout from the workbook, one of the slides talks about using mindfulness, or one of the goals of mindfulness training is to increase control of your mind rather than having your mind control you, right? So I've seen well-meaning presenters read that slide and just kind of move on, right? Versus the way Adam Payne spoke about it was he explained that often events in our lives and our reactions to those events happen so quickly, they're simultaneous. So pretend I'm snapping both fingers, but for the sake of holding the mic, right? So you get anxious, you start doom scrolling on your phone. A client complains about your fee, you feel guilty, and you think about, if you should offer them a fee reduction, right? Someone bumps into you and you start yelling at them or get really annoyed. And what mindfulness does is it allows you to put a pause between the event and your reaction to it, right? And the more you practice that, the easier it becomes to access that pause, right? And the more choices you suddenly have in that moment of, okay, I notice I'm feeling anxious. I notice that I have an urge to reach for my phone. Is that going to be effective for me? Or should I maybe return to the source of my anxiety, deal with it, and then the anxiety will subside, right? So again, think about mindfulness taught in that way, right? It's relevant. There's a little mnemonic, which again, I couldn't fully present, but the snapping versus just mindfulness is really important and here's why, and now be on board and go home and practice this in your spare time while you're extremely dysregulated. Okay, so again, that's just one example to illustrate the importance of really making sure we're meeting clients where they're at and engaging them in our treatment. So I want to actually ask you all here if you have pen and paper or on your phone or laptop or iPad or whatever you're using, but just take a moment and think about 1 to 3 challenges either that you've had engaging clients, whether it's in group or individually, or challenges, if you're new to DBT, challenges you envision having as you think about working within a DBT framework. If you don't have a pen, maybe use a phone. Keep a list in your mind. Sorry? So just write down 1 to 3 challenges that you have or envision having engaging clients in DBT treatment. All right, by raise of hand, who has at least one example written down? Okay, who needs another minute? Who wasn't planning on writing anything down in the first place? Okay. Anyone care to share an example that they wrote? Yeah. Homework, yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's great. I think that comes up a lot. Yeah. Your belief or the client's belief that it's not going to work? Okay. Okay. Yep. Yeah. DBT is not good, doesn't work for me, and they haven't really had real DBT. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
I guess it segues into what she said. Willingness when really dysregulated.
Yeah. Yeah. Willingness to actually engage in a process versus I need a magic pill that's going to make me feel better right away. Absolutely. Now, I want you to also just keep that pen, paper, phone, whatever it is, and just take another moment to see if you can write a sentence or two on what you feel your therapeutic style is, right? So you can think about this as what are the things that really excite me in therapy? How do I tend to work with clients? If I was writing a sentence, it would be something about how, like, I tend to focus on relationships and attachment a lot in the work that I do, and then bring in other modalities to support that. But just take a moment to think about what is it that kind of characterizes you as a therapist. And if you can just put your hand up if you have something or the beginnings of something written down. All right, I'll give another minute. And then I want you to take a moment to think about if there are any ways that that style of yours feels like it comes into conflict or could come into conflict with the DBT framework. So I know for me, doing brief coaching calls in between sessions is always challenging, and I always have to kind of steel myself for it because my tendency is like, let's do a nice, like, supportive therapeutic conversation, right? When actually the focus is, all right, what's going on? What skills have you tried? What else can you try next? So again, take a moment to think for you, are there any places where the way you naturally lean feels like it could be at odds with the DBT framework? And if anyone does have any examples, you want to raise your hand and share, love to hear.
Question. I'm not sure this
Yeah.
can answer your question, but I have a hard time sometimes, like when clients develop a very severe trauma, so like they have very good coping skills. And what happens is that their coping skills outweighs any skill set that I'm going to give them. Like the immediate, like feeling the distress tolerance skills are not always enough.
Yeah.
It feels like there needs to be like another 20 pages on distress tolerance.
Yeah. So we'll get to this, and I think this ties into what someone else was saying before about the client doesn't believe the treatment's going to work, right? When we often will go to a training, right? We learn about a therapy, and we're all gung ho, and we're like, "This is amazing. I know the perfect client for this. It's going to fix all their problems." And we forget that the client has not been on that journey with us, right? And we actually need to sell the therapy to them. And this is true whether you're working individually with clients or working in a skills group, right? Just because you think and research thinks that a skill is helpful and useful does not mean the client is going to be on board. And we'll talk about some strategies for how to address that, but I think that's definitely something that comes up, I think, very frequently. Thank you. Yeah.
I can sometimes find myself too much change-oriented when the client needs to like pull down,
Yeah.
like I have this great idea, okay, let's go. And I think then I can be too quick, like too much like, and
Yeah.
like being in the moment and dealing with the pain.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I have a plan.
Being on the acceptance side of the dialectic and being able to be mindful of the client and where they're at and not just kind of rush in with our own agenda. Yeah. Any other places where you feel like your style, the things you like to do kind of are at odds with, yeah, go ahead.
Kind of the opposite
Okay.
of what you said, which is kind of almost a fear of pushing towards that change. Like feeling like, is it too much? Am I fully with the client? Am I showing enough validation, enough acceptance? Like, is this the right time? But at the same time, wanting to create an environment of change.
Right. Right. Which, I mean, from the way you're describing it, could also be potentially a lack of mindfulness, right? Which, I mean, we all as humans struggle with, right? We're so caught up in what the process should be, we forget to kind of be present in the process. And that can fall on both sides of the dialectic, either leaning more toward acceptance, more toward change. Absolutely. All right. So what we are going to try to do here, sorry, is, I know I need my notes though. Thanks. All right. I think that we could spend probably days talking about challenges in DBT treatment, right? Especially those of you actively working with DBT clients. The examples just kind of write themselves. But just to set the stage, we're going to focus on a few quick examples of challenges that can arise in engaging clients. And we'll talk about some solutions, and then we'll have a chance to actually role play and practice this out. So there's a great quote from Marsha Linehan from the DBT Skills Training Manual that I think lies at the bottom of a lot of struggles engaging clients. And it's the idea of not giving up on the skills, right? You have this skill, you're all excited about it, you present it to a client, they're excited about it, right? Halavai, and then they try it and then they're like, it didn't work. And then you go, okay, well, on to the next skill, right? Marsha compares DBT to it's skills training, right? This is different from other therapeutic approaches, and developing a skill takes time, right? If you're learning to play the piano, most people are not sitting down at the piano and playing a beautiful melody the first day, right? They're going to be lucky if they can string two notes together and if they're even the notes they were trying to go for in the first place, right? But with practice and with time, you can get to the point where, okay, if I have the notes in front of me and if I go really slowly, I can, make it through this piece. And then I can do it without the notes, right? And then I can actually just sit down and my fingers can almost find the keys themselves. And it's the same thing with skills training. It's not going to happen right away. It's a process, and it's really important for us as skills trainers to remember that so that we can be in that process with our clients and not collude with their frustration with the process. So Marsha writes, when current problems are stressing, staying with a skills training agenda requires the skills trainers to take a very active role, controlling the direction and focus of the session. Many therapists and skills trainers are not trained to take such a directive role, right? Think of whatever training you had in reflective listening and sitting and making what one of my professors called therapeutic clucking noises, right? Right? We get really good at that. And thus, despite their good intentions, their efforts at skills training often peter out as participants' problems escalate, right? Raise of hand who resonates with that at all, right? So you come in, again, well-intentioned, and you've got this great plan, and then you and the client are getting frustrated over and over again. It's not working, it's not working, it's not working. and you give up and throw in the towel too soon. So that's one very real challenge in engaging clients in DBT treatment. Some other challenges of, again, a few, there are many, clients who are constantly in crisis, where you're putting out fires all the time and they're always coming in with another emergency. So you can go, 2 months into treatment and you're like, have we spoken about a single skill, right? That's something that can come up. The lack of immediate reinforcement, like we were talking about. So the client tries the skill and it doesn't work and they're already throwing the towel in. And some problems that come up in group therapy is that DBT skills groups tend to be less reinforcing for therapists than maybe a process group. I was saying DBT groups tend to be less reinforcing for the therapist than like a process group where people are touchy-feely and they're like emotionally regulated and they're supporting each other, right? Where you like sometimes walk into a DBT group and people can be either completely disengaged. It's one thing to sit in silence with an individual client for however many minutes. It's another thing to sit in front of a group, right? And have one question after another, right? So who did their homework, right? Who can think of an example of a time they were upset? It's like, you're all emotionally dysregulated. You all have examples of time you were upset. Why are you staring at me silently, right? So the groups can be really challenging for therapists. Clients often don't want to do their homework, right? Because let's be honest, which of us as adults is like, I'm sure there are some people in the room who would be excited about homework, but if someone came to me and was like, here's your homework for tomorrow, I'd have some choice words for them, right? So clients are not compliant with homework. And clients, where you're dealing with a group of extremely emotionally dysregulated people, they may have really intense reactions to, your smile was a little wider at the person next to them's homework review versus theirs, and suddenly they're dysregulated and storming out of the room. So it's a real challenging balancing act that you're doing all the time working with this population. And the question is, what do we do about that, right? Before we answer that, we need to just get on the same page.
It's the laptop.
Okay.
What is that? Just a minute. You can continue.
Congratulations, your domain is available. Okay. Sorry.
I want to show him.
Yaffi. All right, so the first thing that's really important to clarify is what we're doing in DBT treatment. And DBT treatment is about the skills, right? It's about learning the skills, it's about strengthening the skills, and it's about generalizing the skills. Which means that if you're running a group, you are not a process like group therapist, right? You're a teacher. You're sitting there and you need to teach, and that's a different skill set, right, than the skills required to run a process group. And if you're with an individual client, you're kind of taking the role of a coach, right? I heard someone say once that groups put the skills into clients and the job of the individual trainer is to pull those skills out. And it's important to be cognizant of what your role is in any given moment, right? Because if you're, wearing a DBT hat on the one hand, but a client comes in and you're like, oh, let's like talk about and just, only validate how challenging this problem is, what you're doing may be nice and supportive, but it's not necessarily DBT therapy. And thus, when you see that the client is not engaged in DBT treatment and not doing skills, it's worth taking a look at, well, is what I'm offering actually DBT treatment? If what you are offering is DBT treatment, then we're going to talk about a few things that can help boosting client engagement. The first thing we're going to talk about is what I call the R factor. So we've got 3 R's that we're going to discuss. Right, because in the spirit of DBT, we need a new mnemonic or acronym. So the first one is relevance, okay? And this is true not just of DBT, but of any therapeutic approach, any therapeutic intervention. If it does not feel relevant to the client, it is not going to land and it's not going to work, right? I could tell you all to sit here and every 5 minutes, wiggle your toes, right? Every 5 minutes through the rest of the workshop, wiggle your toes. Some of you will try it once. Some of you might try it twice. Most of you would probably try it 0 times, right? Versus if I said, there's actually research that wiggling your toes periodically can help increase blood flow, and especially after lunch, right? Divert some of that digestive energy and actually like bring more oxygen to your brain, right? You might be a little bit more inclined to give it a shot. And it's the same thing with clients, right? And this is especially true of individual therapy where you're actually identifying, behaviors with the client that you want to decrease and behaviors with the client that they want to increase. You want to make sure that what you're talking about is relevant to what the client is there for, or you're going to lose them. All right? So that's our first R, is relevance. The second R is reinforcement, and we could spend multiple workshops just talking about this. But just to give a sampling, We are reinforcing the clients are reinforcing us all the time. And just to give a few examples, right? They were talking about in the first panel or earlier this morning, right, about how they used to have floaters at the Renana IOP, and then they stopped, right? Think about what it does for a client if they know that every time they leave a group, they can talk to a therapist they really like, right? You're reinforcing them not participating in groups, right? Or, think about what happens if every time a client doesn't do homework, right, in group, you call on them, they say, I didn't do it, you just move on to the next person, right? They get relief if they don't have to be in the spotlight, versus you sit there and you use their time in homework review to do a chain analysis with them, right? And think about the reinforcement that happens then. It's really, really critical. It's very helpful to have a team to do this, but this is also something that can be done individually or in individual supervision. It is really, really crucial to be aware of the reinforcers that we are providing our clients with, and also the reinforcement that they're getting in their lives, right? A common one that's spoken about all the time, but if a client self-harms and everybody's suddenly really concerned and caring and compassionate toward them, why would they want to give that up? So the second thing that we need to be aware of, and Saki was touching on this in the panel discussion before, is what is you can talk about this different ways, right? What's the function of the behavior for the client? What's the psychic motivation for the behavior? However you want to label it, but it comes down to what is reinforcing what the client's doing, and how can we reinforce and increase the behaviors that we want to see more of, and make sure that our reinforcement decreases behaviors that we want to see less of, all right? So we've got relevance, reinforcement. Can anyone guess what the third R is? Relationship, all right? And this is, again, is not specific to DBT, but research has shown time and time again that a crucial factor in the efficacy of therapy across modalities is the therapeutic alliance and the therapeutic relationship. So, a few things to take into consideration here. One is, this is where your therapeutic style comes in, right? Relationship, in a lot of ways, is an experience in which two individuals are genuine and vulnerable with each other to a certain extent. And the more genuine each party in the relationship is, the stronger the relationship will be. So, if you walk into every DBT group that you're running or every DBT session going, okay, I know my supervisor said I should do this, but I actually think this is ridiculous, right? That's going to impact your relationship with your client, and that's going to impact their relationship in turn with the skills that you're trying to teach them, okay? Hold on. All right, something else about relationships is, woo! Okay. All right, PC wins again. That is mine. You can have it. No. Yeah. Okay. So, yes.
So that's something that's hard. The reinforcement piece, while it makes sense, it's something that I struggle with in terms of chain analyses and sort of putting group members on the spot if they haven't done their homework or if they've come late. And I've had clients tell me for, let's say for them, like getting up in the morning, getting somewhere on time is incredibly hard. And they managed to do it, and they came 10 minutes late to group. That wasn't with me, it was somewhere else. And they were kind of put on the spot and questioned about it. And for them, that was unbearable. That was like, for them, it was such an achievement to have gotten there 10 minutes late. And I feel like that's just, while I understand that it's very, responding to clients and trying to get close to the people on it, I think that we have to be careful. I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but sometimes it could be more than the client can handle.
Yeah, I'm glad you're bringing that up, and I completely agree. I actually kind of leads into what I was going to say next, which is that part of building a relationship with clients in a group setting is being consistent and dependable and having clients know what to expect, right? To avoid situations like that. Because there's a big difference between, okay, if you walk in at this time, we're doing mindfulness, you can't come into the room, setting that up as an expectation up front versus someone comes in and you walk in and immediately you're doing a chain analysis and they had no idea that this was coming. Right? So I think, even small things like coming to group early, making sure that you have a board and markers ready, right? Making sure your handouts are printed. All of these things are, again, you're working with a group of people who often have a lot of relationship trauma, really challenging relationship history. And when you can just show up as much as you can in a way that's consistent and dependable and where they know what to expect, you create an environment of safety, you create an environment of trust, and you allow them to lean slowly further into that relationship that you're developing with them. And it's about, all of these things, right, are dialectics where we need to balance the different components there. But absolutely, there can be a trade-off where, okay, in favor of the relationship, I'm actually, and talking about reinforcement, with that client, it sounds like what would have been effective for them would have been to be praised for coming on time. Maybe not in front of the whole group, maybe individually, but you want the reinforcement that you're offering not to fit some, preset checklist of what DBT is supposed to look like, but to be tailored based on your relationship with and your knowledge of the individual client. Okay. Another thing, though, that's really important in relationships, and Chevy Sloan earlier was talking about this in her presentation, but it's also being human, right? Being consistent and being dependable does not mean that you never mess up. And in fact, there's really powerful learning and modeling that can occur when you as the therapist demonstrate to clients that you messed up and it's okay and you can move on from it, right? And yeah.
I had an experience that I was sitting with a patient, and then there was a knock on the door, and I did double schedule. And
Yep.
the patient said afterwards, "Wow, I can't believe you took it like this. You were okay.
Yeah.
You didn't feel like it was." I said, I feel a bit guilty, but I don't. This isn't the worst thing that happened. And it was a much good opportunity to talk about it.
And it's often these mistakes we don't realize we're making, right, that actually stick with, it's just the irony of like doing therapy. It's not typically your well thought out planned interventions that really stick with the client. It's the offhand comment you made as they were walking out of the room that changed their lives. But all right, we do what we can. Okay, so these are the 3 R's, right? Making sure the information's relevant. And by the way, I highly recommend when I run DBT groups, I always review my notes. I review the DBT skills manual because there are teaching notes, there are stories, there are research points. It's all there. So being prepared can go a long way toward making the information relevant for your clients. Reinforcement, again, thinking about what you're, positively reinforcing and negatively reinforcing, and your relationship with them. In the interest of time, I'm gonna just go through this quickly, but using the skills for ourselves in the groups, right, can go a long way toward promoting engagement when clients see that the skills are things that we use and are relevant for us, right? So even using mindfulness skills to reflect back to a client when they say, my sister was being so annoying, she wouldn't shut up about her stupid boyfriend, right? And you reflect back to her and you say, okay, it sounds like you noticed yourself getting really irritated as your sister spoke, at length about her boyfriend, right? Even just reflecting back in a way that's skillful and mindful can help engage clients and show them in real time what it is that you're trying to teach them to do. Using Dear Man, right? If you need to confront a client, use the Dear Man skill. Why not? It's teaching and getting your point across. Validation, of course, balanced with problem solving, emotion regulation, using your please skills, right? If you're about to run a group and you've had back-to-back sessions, take a second to have a bite, have some water, go to the bathroom, right? We're able to do that. And using distress tolerance. If groups are getting rowdy, taking a deep breath, doing some progressive muscle relaxation, really clenching your toes in your shoes. These skills, the more these skills are accessible and seamless for us, the better able we will be to present them in a way that's authentic to our clients. And then homework review, right? Big topic. Again, in the interest of time, we'll go through this quickly. But the general balance to strike with homework review is a combination of validation and problem solving. I understand that you have so much going on in your life. It's really hard for you to remember homework. You're also paying a lot of money for this therapy, for this program. What can we do together to help you remember to do your homework? Should we set an alarm on your phone? Would that be helpful? Do you want to make a buddy system with a friend? Would it be helpful to offer yourself some kind of reward? I forgot to say this about reinforcement. I never thought I'd be a fan of this, but stickers are a really powerful thing for adults, for kids. They're concrete. People roll their eyes at them for the first couple sessions, and then what do you know? People are kind of smiling to themselves when they get a sticker for completed homework. With grown-ups. I've actually exclusively used stickers with grown-ups. I don't really work with kids, sometimes with adolescents. Even with grown-ups, they will hate it in the beginning. They'll think it's juvenile. You have to be sensitive about how you introduce it. But just something that says, hey, I see you. I see the work that you did. Good job. It's amazing. All right, also in homework review, giving equal attention to successes and failures. you don't want to move on too quickly from either. If a client says they used a skill, you want to pause and mark that and celebrate that and reinforce that. And if a client says, I didn't do my homework, I didn't have time, you want to really understand why, right? Were you planning on doing your homework when you left group? Okay, so what happened? And if you weren't planning on it, why not? I didn't think it would work. I didn't really understand the skill. Okay, so let's talk about that, right? Success will breed more success, so you want to really highlight those successes, but at the same time, just gliding past failure will reinforce the idea that, okay, if I said I didn't do it, then we just kind of move on. And that's not something you really want to be reinforcing either. Like we said, model mindfulness skills with reflecting on homework. They say, I'm so stupid, I did it wrong, I screwed up the whole thing. All right, it sounds like you're having a lot of negative thoughts about yourself related to this homework, and yet I'm noticing that you actually said that you thought about a skill. Has that ever happened before? Did you ever think about a skill before screaming at, the person who cut you off in traffic? That's amazing. And next time maybe you'll actually do the skill, and let's talk about how that could happen. In groups, I find that it's helpful to know how long your homework review group is going to go, divide it up by the number of people in the room, and then as excruciating as it might be, each client gets 10 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever it is. This solves the problem of like the oversharers and overtalkers taking up and dominating the whole group. But it also stops those wallflowers from getting looked over, and it means that you actually have time, whether it's, okay, you didn't do this homework, so was there any skill that you used? Did you think about using any skill, right? Really digging for those successes, but also taking time to understand and address where the problems are and where the gaps are. All right, probably gonna have to play with the time for this. Oh, and this is an old version of the PowerPoint, so we'll play with this a little bit. But me talking for another, whatever it is, 20 minutes is not gonna be even close to as helpful as actually sitting and practicing some of this. So what I want you to do first is just think to yourself, where is an area where I would like to work on increasing engagement with clients, right? Am I really good at making sure that the material is relevant, but I forget some of the relationship factors, right? Are there things I'm reinforcing with clients that I may not want to be reinforcing? Just take a moment to think about what a kind of tiny next step could be for you in increasing engagement with your clients. And you can keep thinking, but in the interest of time, what I want to do, how many people had to do role plays in grad school? Not enough. No one here has suffered enough. Okay. So it's awkward, and they're really, really helpful. So the idea here, I'm going to divide us up into clients and therapists. You can pick one of the 3 scenarios. We'll go through these. You'll take a few moments to talk with your partner about setting the stage for your role play. You'll conduct the role play. You'll have a few minutes to debrief. We'll come back together as a group. And the idea here, I wish we had enough time that everyone could play the therapist and the client and switch, because that's really, the ideal way to do this. But it actually is really powerful to sit in the client seat every once in a while and to see what it feels like in the role of the client to experience the therapist interventions. So the way that we're going to do this, again, half the group will be therapists, half will be clients. You'll choose either between you and your partner. You could pick a scenario that's like real for you, describe it and role play it together. Or you could use example 2, which is of Adam, who's withdrawn and quiet in group, is really like not forthcoming about his homework review, and how might you engage him and try to elicit some information, some intervention that could be useful. Or you could use the example of Galia, who's a client in individual therapy, who seems excited by the skills presented, but keeps returning to therapy saying they didn't work, and then just uses the rest of therapy to talk about the problems and the things going on in her life. All right, so spend a minute to think about how you'd like to structure this. In the meantime, I'm going to just go around the room and do A and B. A are the therapists, B are the clients. All right. Okay. Sorry to interrupt. I'm going to ask that we wrap up the role plays / conversations. All right, so I'm going to ask for your attention back up here, please. Okay, so I'm going to ask clients first. By raise of hand, whoever's willing to share, what was something that your therapist in this role play did that felt, not intellectually, but felt helpful to you as the client, or piqued your interest as the client? for the clients, what was something your therapist did here that felt helpful for you as a client or piqued your interest as a client? Yeah.
Well, I had Heather, my therapist, and she was able
Yeah.
to just keep me on track. Because I did the third role play, so I kept wanting to go back to either what I did and why it didn't work, or that maybe you should just use a different skill, like if maybe this isn't the right skill for me, because I like a lot of other skills, and she was able to just keep me, but not like in like a taking me to task type of way, but more like validating, like sounds like you did a really great job, but like let's just go through it together, and she wanted to like help me really like figure out how to work through these skills.
Amazing. Thank you. And thanks, Heather. Yeah.
Yeah, very similar. Like I kept also took the third one,
Gal-
and I kept trying to. I have that all the time with my clients, and so I kept trying to like divert it, and she did a very good job of keeping me on track. And I found it was helpful that you kept asking me questions instead of telling me, you were asking me, like asking me. Okay, so what it is, what do you think how would that skill be helpful for you? How do you think you could, maybe what do you think why was it hard for you to remember it? What could be helpful for you? So by asking me questions, it kept bringing me back. Instead of going off with what I wanted to talk about, I had to come back and I also felt like he cared and he was curious. He wasn't telling me what to do.
I was going to say, I think that hits all 3 R's, right? You're making sure it's relevant by asking the client and kind of bringing them into the conversation. You're not reinforcing the departure from the topic of conversation, and you're doing it in a way that's relational. That's great. Someone, yeah, go ahead.
So I have a real life scenario.
Okay.
Client, and threw her very quickly in a very complicated situation. From the client's perspective, from my perspective, she seemed regulated, which was actually quite helpful, and curious and authentic.
That's great. So using the relationship, but also using, I don't know how many skills you had to use, Miriam, in that moment to stay regulated, but keeping ourselves regulated is huge. And you wanted to say something?
There was like a metaphor that he says like slow down 0.5. That it was like I could imagine the 0.5 like slowing down, and it was very helpful for be more focused.
Having something concrete and relatable, you could kind of anchor the idea in. Okay, great. Therapists, you can go either way with this. What either felt challenging for you as you were doing the role play, or was a place where you felt like you were successfully engaging the client?
I think it's hard when the client, like I did number 3, when you try to slow them down to see and also get curious, but they still really are in it. They're really in their scenario. And there's like that balance between that relationship and wanting to keep that relationship and that validation that you're understanding all what they are trying to explain to you, with also then trying to give them the skill set. So that's always my dilemma.
Yeah, that's a hard one. What else? Therapists, how is it? Yeah.
We used the first one, and we're dealing with a client who, the question was really, are they willing to work on a skill set, or are they just in a complaint mindset? And to try to sift through where they're blaming everybody else, they're blaming this party and that party, and trying to see if there was even a window for where they could start working on themselves, as opposed to shifting the blame onto another person. So that was very much what we were working on. And you stopped the scene because you might have just did something.
Sorry. We're just getting there. Any other thoughts from anyone who was in the therapist role? It's interesting. I mean, first of all, it's easier to talk about other people than ourselves, but it's actually interesting that it seems clients were more easily able to point out what the therapist was doing that was helpful versus the other way around, which I think is why it's so valuable sometimes to kind of shift and sit in that client role. But for whoever did do the role plays, thank you for participating. Just to kind of wrap up here, so again, we spoke about the R factor, the 3 keys to client engagement. We spoke about using the skills ourselves, both to promote learning, promote modeling, to stay regulated. Lots of benefits there. We spoke about some specific strategies for homework review. And then the question that I want to leave you with is, doing a little bit of a homework assignment here, but there will be no follow-up. What's one thing that you can commit to doing this week with a client or with a group that you think would be a step for you toward increasing engagement with your DBT clients? And if you have examples, I would love to hear. It might also spark some inspiration for other people. So take a moment to think about this. Go ahead. Absolutely, yeah.
I find like if you're making a judgment on like what they did well, then they like some clients they need that validation so badly, then like they have this dependency, and like it's kind of like I don't know, like where's the balance between reinforcement and like asking them to reflect how they feel about how did it work for them, how did they feel that they did that.
It's a great question, and it's so individualized for the client. I think the first step is seeing where they are on the continuum of kind of whether we want to call it validation seeking or independence versus dependence. We want to kind of mark where they are, and our hope is to bring them to more of a middle ground where is there, I mean, probably not off the top of my head, but I think you see with clients, right? If the client like will never give themselves credit and is always asking you, how did I do? And what was that? And it wasn't really good, right? Then they may need to get to a point where you can say, you might model it for them at first and then get to a point where you say, I want you to tell me how you were skillful this week, right? And the diary card is, I mean, this just built into the DBT diary card to do this, but it may be a process of first modeling and then actually having them let you know themselves what they did. So that can be a way to kind of help bridge the gap. Yeah. In the last minute, any other thoughts about something you'd like to do this week to try to engage your clients more? Yeah. Right. Both kind of reinforcing and also making sure it's relevant for them so they're bought into it. All right, I think we have time for one more example if anyone has anything. Yeah.
Maybe just practicing mindfulness for a minute or two before walking.
You will never go wrong with practicing mindfulness.
Using mindfulness then to get some clarity to determine which of the R's feels the best entryway in and where you want to sort of
Beautiful.
allow yourself to sort of open with and go from there. But I think just even the mindfulness itself allows you to have greater intention of being present and going and moving with that client.
100%, which is why everyone does this differently, but a lot of DBT programs, the way the schedule works is, you do mindfulness and then you do, a module and then you do mindfulness and then you do a module and then you do mindfulness and then you do a module because it's the foundation of everything. Absolutely. All right, so we are at or over time, but thank you all for being here post-lunch. And I'm available for questions, but we do have to clear the room for the next presentation.